So I know Jennifer let me know that she may be late tonight, but I think everybody else is here, if I'm looking at the screens correctly. Okay. Good evening. It is 6:30 p.m. Mr. Verlingo, can you call the roll so we can call the special board meeting to order, please?
Yes, Mr. Campbell.
Here.
Ms. Chrysler. Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Ms. Mooring.
Here.
Ms. Piccolo Antonio.
Here. The first item that we have on the agenda tonight is a presentation on our redistricting process. I don't know if I'm turning it over to Mr. Barrett, Mrs. Elliott, or Mr. Leopold. I think all three of you probably, because I know you have, I'm guessing you have a presentation to share with us, and maybe you can talk with us also about the committee and the process, just for anybody who's watching and wanting to know about that. So I will turn it over to you all.
Yeah. Art, Burl, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for being here. I know we have many viewers on YouTube, so thanks for being there to as we talk about our redistricting plan tonight. It's an exciting time in our district. And as you know, we're growing in Gahanna at an accelerating rate. This growth brings excitement and change. Over the next few years, we will be welcoming many new families into our district, and phase 1 and 2 of our master facilities plan will allow us to increase capacity and add learning spaces to accommodate this growth. As superintendent, it's my responsibility to make sure we accommodate the growth we are experiencing. To that end, it is important that we assign students and staff in an appropriate way to ensure our schools are not overcrowded and that learning can flourish for all of our students in all of our buildings. Since December, our redistricting committee, comprised of 13 committee members across the district, so we tried to represent every single school in our district. It met 7 times to examine current attendance boundaries, enrollment projections, feeder patterns, and review community feedback. The committee also hosted 2 live feedback sessions to listen to our community to ensure the process was deliberative and that the community members had a voice. The committee worked very hard to create a plan that was the best for our district for the next decade or so and beyond. And it was really, really important to the committee that they take their time and do this in the most intelligent and thoughtful way possible. So we were going to unveil the plan in March, but instead we took some time to rethink things. The committee revisited some things, and the plan we're going to talk about tonight is the result of that work. We know that redistricting is a very difficult process. The great thing about our school district is all of our schools are fantastic. Our teachers in our schools really engage with kids, and parents and students build relationships, and they don't want to leave a particular school they feel comfortable with. And we know this process is not easy, but we've worked to take all of this into consideration in this redistricting plan. Yet we know some will be unhappy, but we will work with families to do the best we can to make the transition that we're going to make as easy and thoughtful and caring as we possibly can. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Scott Leopold with Cooperative Strategies. Scott leads redistricting efforts across the country. He's been doing this a long time, and many districts that are growing in Central Ohio, Hilliard, Olentangy, and Gahanna, and many others use Cooperative Strategies and Scott as they navigate through the difficult redistricting process. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll go through a presentation and talk about all the things the committee considered as they developed a plan that was best for our district. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Steve. I'll just kind of go through our agenda for this presentation. We'll briefly review the process, make sure that we understand the why, for some of the people that are viewing online. We'll go through some background information. We'll review the options very quickly that we presented to the community initially, those 5 options that we had, and the community feedback that we have that's associated with that. We'll then go through the final redistricting plan, and then we'll talk about next steps. Here's the overall process. This is what we followed, from the beginning in the fall. We kicked off, we established our committee. We talked about some guiding principles. We got some feedback from the community around that we use to kind of serve as a barometer for how the community may react to certain types of options. We then began to develop a series of options. We had a lot of meetings where we just met with the committee and we played with the maps. We tried to see what moving, one neighborhood to one school may have had as far as impacting utilization, demographics, and those types of things. Once we had those 5 options that we had fleshed out and provided some context for, we launched an interactive survey for the community to provide feedback. And we had some, supplemental focus groups or question and answer sessions where people could kind of get some live response on that. We spent a lot of time reviewing that information, and that's when that's why we're coming to you with those plans today. Understanding the why, big drivers that we have here, Lincoln Elementary, of course, is being replaced on a new site with additional capacity. We wanted to explore options to align feeder patterns and remove detached areas, and I'll talk about that as we get further into the presentation. And we wanted to make deliberative changes that could accommodate future growth and additional capacity. So here's our current boundaries. Let me switch over to my laser pointer here. So I'm just going to kind of start from Goshen Lane, and then I'll kind of work counterclockwise. And so the pink area is our current Goshen Lane boundary. And as you can see, we have 2 detached zones that are located, in the southern portion of the district that are currently zoned all the way to Goshen Lane. The yellow is Lincoln Elementary. You can see the current Lincoln location and the new location. Blacklick Elementary is in green. The High Point Elementary is in orange. Jefferson in blue. Chapel Field in purple. Royal Manor in the light pink. You can see the thick dark lines, those represent our current middle school boundaries. And so looking at this, you can see this area over here feeds to middle school west. And then if we look at, here's our line here, this is the line that's between middle school east and middle school south. So here's our middle school east zone, here's our middle school south zone. And so that just kind of shows what our current situation is that we're dealing with. This is a slide that we pulled from our demographic presentation or demographic study that we did in 2018-19. This identifies those areas that have growth potential. We spent a lot of time looking at this. We've identified areas that are kind of currently under construction in the pipeline, and also areas that may still be vacant or farmland. And we were able to kind of identify how many students and units may come out of those. And so that's something that we kind of looked at throughout the process. We did look at a student potential model, which could determine how many students we may have if we make some assumptions as far as what our growth looks like. I think what's very interesting about this information for Gahanna is that we show our current housing stock in this kind of green solid here. And this accounts for things like housing turnover. So you build houses, people move in, and then they age out. And when other families move in, they may not fill those homes back in at the same rate as they were when they were new. When we look at Gahanna, this is relatively flat. If we look at a district like Olentangy, where we have a lot of homes that were all constructed at the same time, this is much more of a pronounced decline in the existing housing stock. And so in Olentangy, if they didn't build a home, if they stopped building now, they would essentially start declining due to turnover. Because we have a lot of older homes in the school district here, that is resistant to that. So it's nice that we have that. You can see we've got the students that are coming from existing apartments and condominiums here in the red and the pink. And then you can see we release those new units in the orange, the yellow, and the blue. And so the orange is the units that we know about. We know exactly how many units, we know where they are. And then once we get into those blues, that's when that farmland becomes released. And so you can see we show our enrollment peaking, a little, 9,326 students, and then kind of declining out to around 8685 or 8,685 students once everything is built out. And so that's based on essentially our current zoning that we have now, and that just kind of gives us a picture of what our growth looks like into the future. Guiding principles. This is a survey that we put out to the community to just get some high-level feedback on some concepts around redistricting that we like to get that feedback before we start naming names as far as areas that we're changing and moving schools around. We want to try to keep this as objective as possible. This isn't surprising. I'm not going to go through all of these, but attempt to create boundaries that assign students to their closest school. That had a lot of support. Attempt to create boundaries that prepare the district to grow with future minimal changes. Attempt to create boundaries that align feeder patterns. And then you can just kind of see how that looks when we look at some of those other concepts. Now, it's not possible to align with every single one of these. As we went through the options, they aligned with these differently. But we wanted to give the committee kind of a barometer to kind of show them how the community might react to certain types of changes or rationale for those changes. As we go on to the overall options and feedback, we collected almost 1,500 total responses. And I can tell you many responses like their current schools and they don't want to change. This is something that we almost see universally across the country. Many respondents were surprised that replacing the Lincoln facility, making it larger would have an impact beyond the area in and around Lincoln. Several respondents indicated that none of the options presented did enough to support the district's commitment to equity. And so those are just kind of some high-level pieces of feedback that we saw. As we look at the rest of it here, so this is our overall response. So again, we near 1,500 responses. Many respondents like their current schools and didn't want to change. Many comments around allowing 5th and 8th graders to finish at their current school. We had a lot of feedback collected from Jefferson, Blacklick Elementaries, and East Middle School. So this kind of shows you the breakdown of responses. And people could identify with more than one school. And so if you add all this up, it's not going to add up to that 1,500 because of that. This is the overall response. You can see we had more support for options 4 and 5 than we did options 1, 2, and 3. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail here. One thing that I like to do is when we drill down to these results is I wanted to try to see if I could tease out some more objective responses. And so what I did is I filtered the responses on people that identified with the high school only that did not have any students in elementary schools. And so the idea here was to see what does it look like if we look at a subset that maybe doesn't have as as much of a dog in the fight as far as the redistricting goes. I hate to use that term, but that's kind of what this kind of does come down to sometimes. So the table on the left shows all the responses, and then the table on the right shows if we just filter those 114 responses that meet this kind of loadout here. And so you can see we've got more support for option 5, and less opposition to options 1, 2, and 3. And so I think it was good to just kind of look at this and try to see a little bit more objective of a subset there. We went through this already, but this is the current boundaries, and I'll kind of go through these options. I'm going to breeze through these because I really want to get through the recommendation. But this is option 1. We show the overall support here. Roughly 18% strongly support, 17% somewhat support, and then you can see the opposition, and you can kind of see how it breaks down by school. Here's option 2, very similar. Here's option 3, again, very similar. Option 4, you can see we start to get more support here, just because overall people tend to be more supportive of options 4 and option 5. And here's option 5. And if you remember, the only difference between option 4 and option 5 was this middle school change that kind of took this growth area that we looked at in those earlier slides where we showed that potential development. It took a lot of that growth area and pointed it towards south so that it wasn't all pointed at east. So out of the community engagement process, we had some lingering questions that we wanted to just make sure that we could provide some data for, because we wanted to be methodical about this. One thing that really came up, why can't everybody just go to their geographically closest school? Since we live in a world where we can put all the student data into a computer, we can have it run models for us. What we did is I plugged everything into the computer with the school locations, and I said, draw boundaries so that every student goes to his or her closest school. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. And so this shows what that looks like. And so you can see these don't really align to anything because it's purely looking at the road networks and what those boundaries would look like. And so I kept the colors consistent. So Blacklick in the green, Lincoln in the yellow, Goshen Lane in the red, Jefferson in the blue, High Point in the orange, and then Chapel Field in the purple, Royal Manor in the pink. And you can see, I'll see if I can zoom in just a little bit. You can see the existing boundaries are kind of ghosted here, just so you can get an idea of what those boundaries look like versus the closest school. But the more telling thing when we look at this is what the utilization would be. So in this model, Blacklick would be 807 students. High Point would be 713 students. Royal Manor would be 739 students. And then we would have Goshen Lane at 134 students, Chapel Field at 280. And you can just kind of see what that imbalance looks like. And again, we wanted to just show what it would look like if everybody went to the geographically closest school. One of the other questions that came out quite a bit is, why can't we balance the socioeconomics better? We had kind of a range at High Point Elementary of 1% socioeconomically disadvantaged up to about 6%. And so what we did here is I put together a grid to just kind of show how many students do we have throughout the district that identify as socioeconomically disadvantaged. And as you can see, we have a concentration in here in this area of the district. We have another concentration down here a little bit, but we don't have huge numbers of students that are identified as socioeconomically disadvantaged. I think what's more telling is that we have areas where we don't have a lot of students at all that would fall, that would be identified as economically disadvantaged. So kind of what we did is why can't we balance socioeconomics better? What would it look like? And this wasn't really an option. We just wanted to show conceptually what would have to happen in order to provide more of a balance. And so what we did here is, this would be our High Point boundary. And so we really have the areas right in and around High Point. And then we start to take those boundaries all the way to the west. And that gets our High Point percentage up to 13%. And again, remember right now it's 1%. If we look at Royal Manor and Goshen Lane, those are schools that have been a little higher when compared to the other schools. So in order to, again, if we think about those areas, particularly Royal Manor, we've got a concentration of students that are identified as socioeconomically disadvantaged around here. The only way to really get that number down is to zone some students out and zone students that are more affluent in. And so what I did here is I took this area that's kind of north of Royal Manor here, and I've put that into Jefferson. And then I've taken this area here and put it from High Point into Royal Manor. And so you can just kind of see what this looks like. And if you look at the balance, we're 11%, 13%, 23%, 13%. And, it's a little bit better of a balance, but you can see just what has to happen, what the complexity of those moves would be in order to make something like that happen. So now I'll go into the final plan that we have here. We've broken it up into two phases. Phase 1, which will be implemented next school year, 2021-22, and phase 2 the following school year. We'll implement, this allows us to incorporate new elementary additions into our capacity planning. And so looking at phase 1, we're going to better utilize Lincoln with its new capacity. We'll be able to remove the detached zones. We'll be able to address capacity concerns and balance enrollment at Goshen Lane, Chapel Field, Royal Manor, and Jefferson. We'll allow for High Point to stay well utilized until the addition opens. We'll split future growth between Middle School East and Middle School South instead of pointing the majority of it east. And then we'll move the Rocky Fork area to Middle School East as well. Phase 2 will align the feeder pattern for that Rocky Fork area by moving students to Jefferson Elementary. They're currently at Goshen Lane. This will further reduce enrollment at Goshen Lane and will provide further relief at Jefferson and will increase diversity at High Point. So here's our phase 1 changes. And so we take this area in the orange. This would go from Jefferson to High Point. We have this area over here, which is currently zoned to High Point, would go to Blacklick. We'll implement the changes for Jefferson. And so we have the area over here going from to Lincoln. These are the changes for Lincoln. And then our Goshen Lane piece down here would go from Goshen Lane to Lincoln. And we have this area. Again, this is another one of those detached Goshen Lane zones, which would go from Goshen Lane to Blacklick. That Rocky Fork area that I mentioned in the previous slide, it would move from south to east. And then we have this area that would move from Royal Manor kind of to backfill Goshen Lane to better utilize that school, having taken these detached zones into other schools over here. And then we have this area that is north of McCutcheon that is currently attending Chapel Field. They would go to Royal Manor. Looking at our utilization numbers here, so this would include the portables that we have. Blacklick would be 83%, Chapel Field 88%, Goshen Lane 72%. High Point would be 109%, Jefferson 94%, Lincoln 94%, Royal Manor 72%. Looking at the middle schools, East would be 108%, South 106%, West 100%. And again, this is just based on our current capacity. It does include some modulars or portables, but doesn't include any of those additions yet. Just to go through some adjustments that we made to the original option 5. This area right here, the eastern portion of this is Stigler Road. In all of the options, we had this area moving from Chapel Field to Royal Manor. We made this adjustment to leave them at Chapel Field, to kind of keep that well utilized. And it was easy to accommodate by Chapel Field's capacity and allowed us to have lower enrollment at Royal Manor. So that was really the only change that we had from option 5 as presented earlier in the process. Here's our phase 2. So this is 22-23. The only changes that we have here, we take the rest of this piece here that we move from Jefferson to High Point, And that allows us room in Jefferson to align this Rocky Fork area with Jefferson and East that we had moved the previous year. Looking at our enrollment and utilization, 72% at Blacklick with the addition, so it's poised to be able to absorb that growth. Chapel Field well utilized at 88%, Goshen Lane 75%, High Point 89%, Jefferson 95%, much lower than they are today. Lincoln 94%, Royal Manor 72%, and we're all pretty well balanced with the middle schools here, 85, 83, and 80%. Looking at the socioeconomics, we've gotten High Point from 1% up to 6%, and everything else is pretty close. I think it's plus or minus 5% from what it is today. So here's the new boundaries that you can kind of see in their entirety here. So we're using the same color scheme, but you can see how everything is aligned. So Jefferson is in the blue, High Point in the orange, Lincoln in the yellow, Goshen Lane in the red, Chapel Field in the purple, Royal Manor in the pink, and Blacklick in the green. And you can see the middle school lines here. And so you can see we do have a feeder split at Blacklick, but this is just one of those things. We looked at some scenarios where we could, could we align Blacklick so that all those kids go to South, and it just didn't balance the utilization that we need, the way that we needed it to account for that future growth. So as far as next steps, district-wide communication will be sent along with a recording of this presentation. We'll have targeted communication that will be directly sent to families impacted by the boundary changes. Phase 1 changes, again, will go into effect next year. Families of next year's 5th and 8th graders may submit an in-district transfer application if they're interested in maintaining their student's current school. Information about the in-district transfer process can be found on the district website. And the phase 2 changes will go into effect the following year in 2022-23. So that concludes my presentation. Jill or Steve, if you wanted to add anything. Oh, Steve, you're on mute.
Thanks so much, Scott. We know you and the committee and Jill Elliott, our assistant superintendent, worked really hard to listen to our community, to make the appropriate adjustments, to look at feeder patterns, enrollment patterns. And this plan is a phased-in approach, and it really is necessary for us, right, to populate our new elementary school, Lincoln. And it also addresses, as we move into phase 2 of our master facilities plan, we'll be able to populate those schools as those additions come online. So we really appreciate, I know there was many times where you made adjustments to this plan. So thank you so much for your hard work. I think we can open it up now for questions from the board.
I guess I'll go first. I can't tell who's on mute and who's not. But I guess my question that I have is more about how communication is going to be handled. So are we going to, I mean, I know that there will be district communication to families who are impacted. Are we also going to put the maps somewhere? Like, I am a person who I need to be able to like zoom in and look at the streets, and are we able to put the presentation or the maps at least on the district website so that people who want to look at it in a really detailed way can do that soon?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'll take that one, Steve. So we have a district-wide communication ready to go out tomorrow afternoon sometime that will include a video presentation of this, plan, as well as a link to the school locator that was originally shared, so people could take a look there. Just with the special note that we do have that one adjustment to option 5 in the Chapel Field Royal Manor area. And then we also have a summary page that kind of summarizes all of this information in some simple bullets with maps aligned to phase 1 and phase 2 changes. And then by Monday of next week, we will be communicating with those families directly impacted to let them know, which phase they'll be impacted in and what elementary and middle school boundary their home address aligns to. And so that's kind of how that communication will work. We do have information included that, we have some students that don't attend their home school, the school that's aligned to their residence. And so there will be additional communication if there will be changes to any special programming that happens in the district. And so we note that also. So that's kind of the communication plan. We will also have the information on the website.
Yeah.
Okay, you actually answered another question I was going to ask about special programming. So I think Mr. Hairston is unmuted.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yes, I was just wondering, as far as like the transportation and resources and things like that, those children who decide to do a transfer, will the responsibility be with the parents to get their kids to school, or has the bus routes and things have been taken into account with this redistricting plan?
Yeah, that's a good question, Brian. And we talked a lot about that because we want to be able to honor the next year's 5th and 8th graders to be able to stay in their current buildings. We are going to approve those, but they will run through our in-district transfer process, which does not provide transportation to families. So they will be approved, but it will be based on transportation provided by families. We do not offer busing transportation for in-district transfers.
I just have, an observation would be that, equity could mean that you have equal percentages of income strata in schools, but by having lower census numbers in our two highest low and income schools, that's in essence a pathway to giving those students more attention from their teachers. So I think that is a good strategy, given that we can't do the geographic split while maintaining the homeschool approach. So I like to see those numbers lower than at some of the higher socioeconomic schools.
Thank you, everyone. Anybody else have any questions?
I just had a question regarding the involvement of the transportation department during the discussion. Can you kind of lay out how busing was discussed and what kind of impact we're seeing with these changes? How many additional drivers we may need? What kind of route changes we're going to be seeing? What has been discussed and what still needs to be worked out?
Yes, so I'm going to work on pulling up a chart that Jason Key, our transportation supervisor, sent to me, but I will say he was involved in conversations early on with the administrative team, and then he was looped in when we developed the 5 options and was able to take a look at all of them and determine, as compared to our current routes, how many routes would we need to be operating with each of the options. They were all very comparative as far as the number of routes. I want to say that the option we landed on took us down 2 routes, but I want to double check that chart before we solidify that. But Jason's been involved in looking at those routes and the buses that would be needed.
And a lot of that is just due to the increased access to the new Lincoln site when compared to the current site.
Thank you. My other question is, was there any discussion, and this is just out of left field, and so obviously we can shelf this for a future date. Was there any discussion about change of schedules for the elementary, middle school, and high school level? We had brought that up within the last couple of years, but we didn't have an opportune time to really seriously consider a time schedule changes for the elementary, middle, and high schools. I'm just throwing it out there. Obviously, if that's a discussion for another day, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think it probably is a discussion for another day. We didn't talk about adjusting start times in this redistricting process, but you're right, we have talked about it before. We've done some research and talking with other districts that have made some changes to their start times. Most of the districts that we previously had talked to did so because of transportation constraints. And so they went to a 4-tier busing system, which then separates some middle schools and high schools with regard to their start times. So, it has not been a part of this process, but we certainly, it's still in a file right next to down in my bag.
I appreciate that.
I have one more question. As far as the plan itself, how much elasticity does it give us within the boundaries to where I couldn't see the graph, so I don't know if this gets us 10 years, this gets us 5 years, and we will be doing it again in 3 years, whatever the case is. Is there? I couldn't see on the graph how much does it give us as far as growth potential within each school to get us down the road before we're looking at some other means to alleviate some of the growth in certain areas and others.
Can you see it now?
We can't.
Oh, because I need to hit share.
Yeah.
So how about now? Does it look better now?
Yep.
Perfect. So we were pretty intentional. We wanted to make sure that we left as much capacity as we really could in Blacklick, because that had the majority of the growth pointed at it. I wish that I could give you I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you it's going to last 5 years or 10 years, but it's really all dependent on growth. But we were methodical about making sure that we left capacity in there to absorb that growth, so that we didn't have to come back here and do this again. And that was the other reason that we made that middle school adjustment, so that we didn't have all of that growth pointed at middle school east. So, I mean, if we see growth like we've seen it in the last couple of years, I would hope that these are the last 5 years. But if something really explodes, and it may be necessary to look at some possible changes.
Any other questions from anyone? I just want to say thank you to all of you and to our community members who served on the redistricting committee. I know it was a lot of work. I appreciate all of the solicitation of feedback. I think I was able to sit in on at least 2 of those Q&A sessions, and I appreciate that you took the time to answer people's questions, and that feedback ended up getting worked into the final plan. I guess just from a parent perspective, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and consideration given to those students who are at the transition points in the buildings. I mean, all of this, like you said at the beginning, Mr. Barrett and Mrs. Elliott, change is difficult. It's always difficult, but I appreciate that this plan takes those students who are on those transition grades kind of into account. So thank you for all the hard work.
Thank you. I think the committee deserves just all the credit in the world. They met 7 different times, multiple hours, were part of the feedback sessions, and really did listen to feedback. So there was a period of time when we were going to make the announcement at the March board meeting, but we went back to the committee. The committee gave us feedback based on the input we heard in the community and adjusted the plan accordingly. And so you're right, Burl. I mean, it was a very deliberative approach, and the feedback was implemented into the plan. And I also want to thank our Board of Education, because we've gone over this plan with you. You had some great suggestions. That's how we came up with the phased in approach and looking at 5th and 8th grade transition grades. So this has really been a collective effort. And I want to thank Jill Elliott. This has been a very, very difficult project. Lots and lots of changes, lots of adjustments, and lots of consideration, lots of phone calls, lots of emails. So thank you so much, Jill, for your hard work and dedication to this project. And many districts across Central Ohio nearby do this almost yearly. We're fortunate that we've been relatively stable and we haven't had to do this too much, but we're also excited about the growth over the next 5-10 years that we're going to get as we invite new families in. We know as families move boundaries, they'll keep the relationships they've had and they'll build new ones. And we're very fortunate to be part of a community where people want to move and send their kids to school. And so I'm grateful for this work. I know it's very trying and it's a very difficult process. So we appreciate the community's patience as well, because we took a lot longer than we planned to really deliberate over this and to think about things. So we want to thank the community for its feedback. We've had people in our meetings on Zoom talking to us, giving us feedback, and all of that went into this final plan. So thanks very much.
Okay. Unless there is anything else that anyone wants to say about redistricting, we're going to move on to, we have a few action items under general business. Thank you. And Mr. Leopold, you don't have to stay with us for the rest of the meeting. You're welcome to, but thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
I think we have 3 items for action under general business. Is there a motion to approve items number 1 through 3 under letter A, general business?
I'll move, Mrs. Chrysler.
Thanks, Mrs. Chrysler. Is there a second?
I'll move, Daphne Mooring.
Thank you, Mrs. Mooring. Any discussion about these items?
I'll just say that we need to widen the road at Helmbright to accommodate traffic patterns at our new Lincoln Elementary. So we're excited to get this work done. That's what the first item is here. And the second 2 items are surveys for all of the projects that are coming on board in phase 2. So looking at our boundaries, looking at topography, property lines, and those sorts of things that's necessary before we begin this work. So that's what all 3 of these items are.
I remember reviewing the traffic study that was done when we were proposing Lincoln Elementary, and this Helmbright widening was there. But there was also a request to have a turn lane added on Taylor, I believe it's Taylor Road, onto Helmbright. And the city had agreed to put that in their street planning process. Do we know if that, I guess I should know as the government liaison, do we know if that has been discussed, or have you been approached by anyone at the city?
So not that part of it, Daphne. We were going to try to time this when the city was going to be working on Helmbright anyway, and maybe gain some savings, but it didn't quite line up that way. So we're doing this project, out of the Lincoln Elementary budget. There will be 2, the turning lanes are accommodated from our parking lot onto Helmbright, but I don't think that's what you're talking about. You're talking about something else. So no, I don't think that has been in the offing yet. I wish I would have had Scott here tonight and he could have given us an update on that.
Well, with that redistricting map that we just did, there's going to be lots of buses coming from Reynoldsburg, New Albany Road, Taylor, to avoid the Havens Corner. And I think that's the issue that the volume counts were incredible. I don't live on that side of town, so I have no concept, but the recommendation for the turning lane, I thought, was a prudent one. So
yeah, we'll revisit that with Scott and see where we are with that.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, Mr. Verlingo, can you call the roll, please?
Ms. Pickle Antonio,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Ms. Chrysler,
Yes.
Mr. Hairston,
Yes.
Ms. Mooring.
Yes.
We're on Roman numeral 3. Is there a motion to go into executive session pursuant to revised code 12122G4 for the purpose of preparing for conducting or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with employees?
I'll move.
Thanks, Mr. Campbell. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hairston. Any discussion before I give my standard spiel? For anyone who is out there watching the YouTube live stream, I know that we've got a number of people that are actually on tonight because they were interested in redistricting. When we go into executive session, we will be leaving this virtual meeting and going into a different virtual meeting environment. We have to come back to this live stream only to adjourn the meeting. There is no other board action planned for after our executive session. So the YouTube live will continue streaming because we have to come back into public session in order to adjourn the meeting. But there won't be anything else that goes on except for that. Mr. Rulingo, can you call the roll, please?
Ms. Mooring,
Yes.
Ms. Pickle Antonio,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Ms. Chrysler,
Yes.
Mr. Hairston.
Yes.
It is 7:14 p.m. Please make sure you exit completely out of the Zoom. And hopefully everybody has the link.
think we have enough of us back. It is 9:19 p.m. and we are out of executive session. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
I'll second.
Mr. Hairston, thank you, Mr. Campbell. Any discussion? Mr. Rulingo, can you call the roll?
Mr. Hairston,
Yes.
Ms. Maury,
Yes.
Ms. Pickle Antonio,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Ms. Chrysler.
Okay, it's
Good.
still 9:19 p.m. and we're adjourned.
Thanks.
Matt, I don't see anybody else.
Yeah, they just adjourned. I didn't see you in
Oh.
the waiting room there.
Okay, good. Thanks.